Last month, we talked about the importance of rest. Today, we're going to dig a little deeper around our assumptions about work and worthiness. When we told the prodigal son story together, did you see yourself in it? One of the wonderful things about parables and folktales is that at different points in our lives, we may identify with different characters. Perhaps as the son who left and squandered opportunity, the one who stayed and grew bitter, or as the father who didn't care what his son had been doing, he was just so glad to have him back. We can't help but hear the story of the prodigal son from our own context. I remember when I was younger thinking about all the opportunity that the younger son wasted and being annoyed, almost as annoyed as I get at Peter Pan stories. Poor Wendy, forced to grow up early and take care of a bunch of boys who want to stay young forever with no responsibility, but no, they can't actually do that without someone being responsible. It's totally gross. Anyway, the point is that I used to see the anger of the older son who played by the rules and helped take care of the family and understood why he would be so frustrated. Now, with my kids grown and out of the house, I see myself more in the father. If one of my kids frittered away every opportunity given to them and disappeared, but then returned to me, of course I would forgive them and shower them with compassion. We don't get to know about the motivations or the frame of mind of the prodigal son. He decides to collect his inheritance early and leaves town to go blow all his money on partying. He wasn't a family renegade who went to go learn a trade outside the family tradition, or become an artist, or follow a jam band and find himself. He just partied. Then, when famine hit the area where he was living, he had no support system and no savings to get him through. He's not a very sympathetic character, but he does learn a lesson that some people only really get through experience, which is that if one has no plan, no grounding, and no support, it's going to be really hard when things beyond one's control go wrong, and inevitably they will go wrong. Some people are born into situations where they have no support, but his choices put him in that position. Does that mean he should be ignored and left to starve? The son's experience of suffering and his father's compassion will likely change the course of his life. What would have happened if he returned home and was turned away for squandering his wealth? Maybe he could have found some other work as a laborer on someone else's farm and started all over again, but he still wouldn't have had community. But because he had that support and privilege, he had the opportunity to start over again at home with his family. Interpretations of the prodigal son have been used to illustrate a number of ideas and ideals in our culture. One is the value of compassion and family. Another holds up the virtue of the Protestant work ethic. The son who stayed home and played by the rules is illustrating a virtue, as is the son seeking to atone for his leaving through work. The line from Luke is, "But when he came to himself, he said," meaning when he realized what he had to do, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, but here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven, and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands." So he set off and went to his father, but while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. The idea of showing one's virtue and worth through work is a foundation of the Protestant work ethic. And the Protestant work ethic is part of the birth story of the United States, blended in with Puritanism, capitalism, and a little manifest destiny, and you end up with the American dream. The American dream tells the story that each person who works hard will be rewarded in this life with employment, prosperity, and a better life than their parents had. Our social safety net is supposed to be there to support people when things go wrong so they can recover and keep climbing. However, since we've been using the social safety net as a way to subsidize the low wages and healthcare costs of big corporations for years, our safety net has been strained and functions very differently, making the American dream more of a myth than a promise. When people fall, our net has a lot of holes in it, especially for those with any medical or mental health issues that might limit their opportunities for work. And even with all of this in mind, it can be easy to slip into biases and equate success with righteousness and poverty with moral failing because these ideas are so ingrained in our culture. You know that old saying, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life? Well, sometimes folks are lucky enough to be in that position, but most are not. Most people working in repetitive and low-wage jobs may yearn to be doing something not so taxing on their bodies. And many people stuck in offices may wish to be outside with their hands in the dirt and away from screens and meetings. Sometimes even a really rewarding job can be too much. And then beyond paid work, much of the labor we do is unpaid, and not just the volunteering that keeps our congregation rolling, but the day-to-day ins and outs of living. Dishes, laundry, childcare, elder care, cooking, cleaning, shopping, all the things that keep us alive and safe. We also need to rest and to not always be doing. We don't always have many choices in what we do for work, paid or unpaid, but we do have options in the how we treat our coworkers, families, and ourselves, what we stand up for, how we share of ourselves with others. That is part of our work as well. My grandfather worked many low-wage jobs along with being a farmer. When he retired from the local gas station, he still brought a thermos of coffee down and hung out with the guys in the shop for years. They were some of his most cherished relationships. Whether we see our work as a calling, a service to others, or as a paycheck, any work we are able to do with attention and intention has meaning. Our work shapes us, but it does not define us. Does playing by the rules entitle people to wealth and the trappings of prosperity? Which rules? In the story, the father treated his youngest son with compassion, forgiving him before even being asked because he was so glad to have him back. The older son held on to his anger and pettiness because he followed what he understood to be the rules and was not rewarded by his father with parties and gifts. But if the rule is to act with love and compassion, the older son still has a lot more to learn. And since this story is a parable in the Gospel of Luke, spoiler alert, that is what Jesus was going for in the story. I also wonder if the older son ever asked his father for a party or a goat or recognition. And I wonder if the father ever shared his gratitude to his son. If the father shared his gratitude to his son, but perhaps in a way that was not in the form of material gifts, and so the son didn't recognize it. It's also possible that the father needed a lesson in showing his gratitude and care for the son who remained. We don't get the whole story. We're immersed in a culture that says that hard work will be rewarded with material gain, but that's not actually true for most people. What we do to earn a living is not the sum of who we are. And for many of us, it's not our most important and valuable labor for our families and the world. As we consider where we might see ourselves in the story of the prodigal son and how we understand our own relationship to work, meaning making, and compassion, I encourage us all to spend some time unpacking the unconscious biases and assumptions we carry about ourselves and about everybody else. What we find may surprise us. As we reflect on work and how to give it value, we have the opportunity to cultivate greater compassion. As we each find our way in the world, may we be met with forgiveness and compassion, and may we remember that we don't have to figure everything out alone. May we hold this community as a safe harbor to welcome us home wherever we are in our journeys. And so may it be, and amen.